when we go to Giza, everybody talks about the Sphinx. You know, the Sphinx is so cool, but the Sphinx, I mean, really, it's worn down like crazy. It's been rebuilt a ton of times. Clearly, there was another kind of structural shape there even before it was a Sphinx. It does give us a sense because of our good friend Robert Schoch. Robert Schoch and I have known each other for many years. We've spoken at many conferences together. He, his wife, and I are very good friends. And he really pioneered the geological study of how old this area around the Sphinx is and the weathering on the Sphinx. And he has definitively proven geologically that this has to be over 10,000 years ago, which means it puts us in the zone potentially of 13,000 years ago, which would be the end of the last ice age. And that if there was a giant flood that happened because of the end of the ice age, and if some of the other major historical elements that we have around that from stories all over the world, mostly thought to be myths, are true, then there suggests that there was a super advanced civilization here in Giza before the end of the last ice age. Now, people don't really talk about the Sphinx temple that much, but there on the left, you can see the walls of the Sphinx temple, and there at the bottom, and you'll notice those walls are all built of stones that are so large, they would crush trains, they would crush semi-trucks, and there is no way you could roll a single one of these stones on logs. No way. It would crush the wood so easily, it's not even funny. So even just building that is impossible with the means that the archaeologists point to. But let's really get closer here, because the Sphinx temple, as you can see, is completely eroded. One of the elements that used to be part of the surface on the outside of the Sphinx temple still exists. And I want you to take a closer look at this remnant of the outer wall of the Sphinx temple. Do you see that curve there? That curve is one of the most difficult things to do in engineering imaginable. It is extraordinarily hard to get a curve like that to turn out perfectly on a piece of stone. And that's even if you have an amazing factory level technology with saws and advanced conveyors that can move a piece of stone while it's being cut. You know, it takes a lot to cut a stone like that. And this was done around the entire Sphinx temple. And they say, of course, it was just hammered and chiseled out. There is no possible way that you could do that with a hammer and chisel. There just isn't, because the level of precision wouldn't be there. It'd be a little off. It would still be cool. It would still be curved, but exactly like this, no way. And look inside the Sphinx temple, the floor of alabaster, the pillars that are just absolutely massive. And the way they fit these stones and pillars together is wild. They don't just stack them like Lincoln logs. They don't just bring them one over another and just, use cross beams. Instead, we look at the corners and they extend the stones into the corner, into the other side. Now, from an engineering standpoint, that's brilliant, because it means the entire structure's integrity is going to be much, much better. I mean, this is going to survive earthquakes or whatever. But from the building standpoint, the standpoint of actually carving the stone to do this, it's crazy. It's crazy. We don't do this. We don't do this today with our technology. There's no way. It doesn't make sense to do it. We do it a different way to try to strengthen the stone. This is just too hard. And yet for them, it must have been so easy because they did it everywhere. They did it on almost every stone in the corners of the walls. And it's not only there in the Sphinx temple, it's there in other of the megalithic temples throughout Egypt. Now, if we go down to the Serapeum, which is essentially between Giza and Saqqara in Egypt, in the middle of the empty desert, at the end of a boulevard that used to be flanked by 600 sphinxes, which most have been stolen and moved to the Louvre, by the way, a tunnel is excavated going down underground. And so you go about 150 feet underground and you end up in these passages. Now, these passages, Each, you can see in the upper right there about the size of the passages. And then these passages open out into a whole series of different chambers. And in each one of these chambers, there is one of these massive so-called sarcophagi. Now, these are so big, I'll give you a better sense here. Each one of them weighs an estimated 70 to 100 metric tons. They have walls that are 1 to 2 feet thick and lids that are 2 to 3 feet thick. Now you can see some of the Resonance Academy students here walking around one of the stones that you can go down to, and you can see how smoothly polished the surface is. It's insanely smooth and beautiful and polished. And you have the etchings of what looks like hieroglyphics where people are trying to etch into the stone, failing at it really pretty badly. But this is a good evidence of the way that the dynasties in traditional Egypt timeline that we all get taught in school must have tried to claim this site, must have tried to claim that they made these boxes. But these containers are 6 to 7 feet tall. They're around the same width. They're 13 to 16 feet long and polished, and their edges are absolutely sharp, and the wall sides are laser precise. And that tells us that, the level of technological precision it would take to build these boxes is absolutely gargantuan. And there's not just one of them or two of them. There's 24 chambers on just one of the vaults, and over 40 other giant containers like this have been found. The quarry where these blocks are believed to come from, and that where we thought they mined them, is at least 50 miles away and may have been all the way in Upper Egypt. Now, the story gets even more interesting when you realize that if you get inside of these boxes, they're all resonant chambers, and they have perfect resonant tonality. Now, there's a particular frequency that we find when we vibrate inside of these chambers, and I've tested it, and that frequency happens to match a frequency that I found in a very important location in Egypt, one that most of us think of as the most popular, most familiar place where sound resonance is clearly a key to unlocking things. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. And the story archaeologically for this site is that it's a tomb for bulls. And then even though all of these sarcophagi were found empty, the idea is that, these guys put a gargantuan amount of energy into carving these stones, hauling them 50 miles, making them vibrate at the same frequencies inside, creating tunnels 150 feet underground, and then essentially using that to bury bull carcasses, all of which were somehow taken by unsealing these containers, robbing bull mummies from the sites, and then resealing the containers before the whole site was buried under the desert. That's the level of ludicrousness that we have in terms of some of our archaeological beliefs. And it's important to point to that, because while we also have great archaeological ideas in some cases, in other cases, they fall completely flat, and there's just no way they match the actual use and purpose of these sites. You also notice in this close-up here, you can see some of those scratches, essentially where they were trying to put hieroglyphs on these things. They're so hard that you got to scratch it with pretty much diamond, and even when you do, you can't get the line straight at all. I mean, clearly these are not the builders of these things that scratched those things into position. So what are they? Well, I propose an alternative theory, because these things tell us as giant resonance capacitors that maybe this ancient site was somehow used in a particular way to do something, to build up something underneath the energy of the desert itself. Now, if we look at the site and we look at stone and what happens when you put pressure on quartz of different kinds and on quartzite, as well as on other kinds of granite, what we get is a triboluminescence effect, the ability of the stone to actually glow and to release piezoelectricity. Now, if in these tunnels there was water that was channeled in a very particular way through those tunnels, in such a way that it could release a horn-like vibration that would then vibrate these chambers in a particular way, it's my belief that the pressure and the vibration of the sound itself and the resonance of these containers could release electricity. Now, this water flowing idea might seem like a strange one, but as you'll see, if you travel around Egypt, there's places all over the place that suggest that there is some kind of underwater channeling system that existed across Egypt. In Giza, between Giza and Saqqara, there's another site called Abu Sir, and there's an alabaster seal at Abu Sir that covers a tunnel. That tunnel has been geologically tested, and it goes down about 100 feet, maybe 150 feet, around to that same level of depth as the Serapeum. And down under there, they're basically found tunnels. There are tunnel-like passageways, and some areas where these kinds of tunnels coming out of the deeps underground have been found in Saqqara also are tunnels that lead to areas where there is water. Now, look at the structure of the altar, the stones, the bowls that were clearly used for surfacing water for bathing or healing or other magic. It's clear with these alabaster bowls and structures that they were definitely using water in some way. And of course, if we understand the power of crystalline structures of stone and start to understand that stone has a memory system attached to it, this gets even deeper. And if we go to the Giza Plateau, you know, that the sites that I've been pointing to, like the Serapeum and Abu Sir, they're right between Giza and Saqqara. So it's almost like there's a midpoint there. And then the question is, well, if there was underground water systems and energy transfer systems going on here, we should find some here on the Giza Plateau, right? Well, it turns out that there actually is one. And it's down a shaft called the Shaft of Osiris, or the Assyrian Shaft. And it's been totally secret. I've been to Egypt many times on the Giza Plateau, all over the Giza Plateau, never been down there. And finally, Robert Edward Grant was able to get us access to get down into this particular shaft. And when you climb down, you go several stories down through chambers, including through one area where there are clearly these sarcophagi or resonance chambers. And there's evidence of plasma arcing on the ceiling, where it looks like plasma burned through parts of the rock itself. And you go down further from that level and you enter a level where there is actually water underneath the Giza Plateau. Water that probably has several inlets and outlets, channel points that interconnect this site to, say, the underground chamber inside of the Pyramid of Giza, to the Serapeum eventually, and to other sites underground in Saqqara. Now, if we look in Saqqara area, we find Hawarat al-Mokta. And this is, you know, this place, you can tell it doesn't look like a pyramid. It looks like a giant pile of dirt. That's how old it probably is. And we think, oh, yeah, no, it's just maybe they didn't build with this high technology, so it just is eroded. And it's just, you know, this is not even an important pyramid site to talk about, right? And this is in Fayum. But if you go underneath it, what you find is a perfectly acoustically tuned rose granite room with curved granite ceilings and one of these resonant sarcophaguses. Again, tuned to the exact same frequency as those boxes in Saqqara, right? And sorry, in the Serapeum. And guess where else matches the same exact vibrational frequency, which is 91.5 hertz. Well, 100 kilometers away to the north, you probably already guessed it, it's the Great Pyramid of Giza in the King's Chamber. And This really gets interesting because now all these different points in the Egyptian timeline, all of these different sites thought to be built by different dynasties and different periods of time, all now point to having a resonance connection, a resonance-based, vibrational-based energy and sound connection, and a level of sophistication in physics and architecture and engineering and mathematics that goes far beyond our current theories of Egypt. So let's up the stakes on the archaeologists even further with this Great Pyramid of Giza. You might have heard that the Great Pyramid encodes pi. It's true. Its length plus width divided by its height equals pi to 99.9% accuracy, or that it encodes the golden mean ratio, phi. The surface areas of the four sides divided by the base area has a 99.97% accuracy to phi, the golden mean ratio, both of which it does actually in several ways. It also contains the speed of light in air and its geometry, and also by its north latitude, which just seems impossible, right? Well, then, of course, you go down the rabbit hole of Alan Green's work, comparing the proportions in the cover of Shakespeare's sonnets to the Great Pyramid of Giza, and suddenly you realize this thing is a Rosetta Stone for mathematics. It contains almost all the mathematical constants that we know of, and most of which were not created until the last couple hundred years, or so we think, not discovered, so to speak. And of course, beyond this external architecture, there's the resonance technology of the pyramid itself, which is most easily experienced through the king's chamber. And you have never heard reverb like you hear in the king's chamber. It just doesn't exist. And the beauty and the power of this chamber is that it turns out there are two particular key frequencies, and the lower key frequency inside of the king's chamber, the resonance vibration of it is 91.5 hertz, the same exact frequency as we find in the rose granite chamber in Fayum, the same frequency we find in the Serapeum, the same frequency I've found in so-called sarcophaguses all over Egypt. So they designed all of them to vibrate at the very specific frequency. Now, there is also an upper frequency. That's Robert Grant pointing to the little alpha omega that he found on the side of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. That looks like it was pressed into the stone at some point in time. But the upper frequency of the king's chamber in Giza is 117.65 hertz. Now, that seems to be a strange number. 91.5, 117.65. Are these arbitrary? Is this random? Like, why did they choose these frequencies? Well, it turns out that the harmonic ratio between those two frequencies, and you can do this on your calculator right now, can take essentially 117.65 divided by 91.5, and the harmonic ratio between them is 0.7777. That's not an accident. That's not a maybe, that's not a close, that's not a maybe the frequencies are slightly off because the room is slightly damaged. That is, oh my God, exact and crazy. And what I've found is that throughout the pyramid, like here, which is at the base of the Grand Gallery, there's a series of ports in the walls, and every one of them have a different vibrational frequency. And when you put your heads in them, they each vibrate. And when you get the whole thing vibrating at the right frequencies, all applied to these tunnels, the entire Grand Gallery activates, turning on the energy, and you can feel it going into the Queen's chamber, into the King's chamber. It's absolutely amazing, and it has a profound effect on your consciousness. Now, that doesn't just happen in the Great Pyramid. It also happens in the Middle Pyramid, and then also, of course, in the smaller pyramid. Each one of them has their own frequency sets that are created that cause consciousness to adapt and to shift in certain very specific ways. And when you go through them all in sequence, it can be an absolutely life-changing experience. And I've had that several times at this point. So how did these things get built? I mean, this is really is where we come back to it. Okay, so how they did these resonance technologies, got these advanced things. What the heck happened, and how did they build these sites, and how did they create these with technology? How are these stones cut? Well, at one point, I was traveling and I came across this little piece of history about a mythological device or creature, as it was thought to be, called Solomon's Shamir. And the story of Solomon's Shamir is that this Shamir thing was used in the construction of Solomon's temple. The material to be worked, whether it was stone or wood or metal, was affected by showing it to the shamir. So some of the early sources, described the shamir as a green stone. Later, it was described as some kind of worm or substance that had the power to cut through, disintegrate, or eat stone and iron and diamond. Now, this was said to have existed in the time of Moses, which would be essentially in times before the flood. This is one of the 10 wonders or whatever. And it was said that this shamir was always wrapped in wool and it was stored in a container made of lead, because any other kind of container would burst and disintegrate under the shamir's gaze. Now, what's that sound like to you? That sounds like an advanced technology. That sounds like almost nuclear level technology, a technology that you need to, essentially isolate in a particular kind of box, a box maybe like the gold box we see in the Ark of the Covenant, a box that could be a very strong containment system and or capacitor for it. And the shamir worm was used by King Solomon to engrave gemstones. He also apparently used the blood of the shamir worm to make carved jewels with a mystical seal or design. So I'm looking at all of this and I come across, and of course, I've seen this site on the wall of one of the spaces in one of the temples in Egypt. And you have essentially these two people with their faces chipped out, probably by General Horemheb during the time of the fall of Amenhotep III and the rise of Akhenaten. You have this device where you clearly can see this thing looks like some kind of advanced technology. At the top of it, you've got a pair of electrical diodes used in creating a plasma arc. You've got what looks like a Tesla coil and resistor layers to insulate whoever's wielding this thing. That's actually the symbol of the JED, the DJED. And at the top, you've got these amplifier diodes or a plasma laser channel. And so what you have right here is something that looks like a lens or a gemstone embedded in the top. You've got the diodes to create plasma and then some way to extend that plasma energy. So I think they were actually cutting stones with plasma, and they may have had some way to do some kind of gravitational dilation with this object in order to change the weight of stones to be able to move them into position. This is obviously a tool. This is not just a pillar or some kind of decoration. And so that points us to almost a level of, I would say, galactic technology, a level of technology that a star species might have brought to this planet, literally. Either that or human civilization that is so advanced that we lost pretty much all the records of that during the flood. We lost almost all of that, which is why when we look back, we see these megalithic sites and we have no idea how they were built, no idea how they were constructed. But not only this technology piece, but the comprehensive understanding that it points to suggests a level of metaphysics and sciences that are deeply interconnected. Now, I've experienced states of being in these pyramids through the sonic resonance inside of them that showed me that their architecture originates far beyond our Earth in advanced civilizations across the galaxy. One of my first experiences in the Great Pyramid of Giza, laying down with a gold and a silver rod over my chest, crossed in the form of the energy of Osiris, and laying down inside of that chamber, I found myself suddenly opening my eyes and sitting up, and I was in a different pyramid. I was in a pyramid somewhere else, and it had a passageway coming out of the king's chamber in that pyramid out to the outside. And when I went outside, I was on a reddish planet with a reddish star, a place that after many, many years, I came to understand as Arcturus, or part of the Arcturian system. And as I got to explore that more in depth in myself and with others that I had encountered throughout my life, I began to see that this is a place where perhaps the pyramid masters or the pyramid builders actually came from, and that they came to Earth in order to help extend this technological knowledge and understanding.